V Rising is that kind of game that showed up and said, okay, now survival has a new standard for combat and vampire progression. It's an isometric survival action RPG focused on waking up weak, hunting for blood, surviving the sun, building a castle, and rising in power while the world pushes you into bigger fights, solo or online. And I remember well the healthy hype that formed around it precisely because the fantasy is very direct. You are a vampire, but you aren't the supreme vampire yet. You have to earn it the hard way through farming, bosses, and evolving your arsenal. The feeling it gives is that of a tight, controlled ARPG, but wrapped in a survival and building loop that hooks you for hours because there's always a one more upgrade or one more boss to unlock. On the other hand, Vampire's Bloodlord Rising entered early access in 2026 with a proposal that, on paper, pokes at exactly the same areas that make people compare them: Gothic open world, castle, hunting, servants, and co-op. The difference that jumps out immediately is the camera and the promised feeling. Here, it is third person, and the action RPG vibe takes center stage with the fantasy of vampiric dominion and servant management being sold as part of the package from the start. V Rising officially defines itself as a vampire survival action RPG and makes that signature very clear. Any new vampire with a castle and co-op will inevitably be put in the same ring, not out of malice, but because the internet works through shortcuts of comparison. V Rising already has the weight of a complete product and a very clear identity in its isometry and progression rhythm. Bloodlord Rising, being in early access, is still at that stage where promise and potential compete with polish and final direction. In V Rising, I feel the setting sells the vampire as a creature that woke up in a world that has already moved on without him. Vardarin is almost a living hunting board, where you traverse forests like Farbane Woods, full of ruins of an old vampire civilization, and marks of a religious war against the Church of Luminance. This tone of decay works because the map isn't just pretty. It tells a story through the scenery, in the broken clearings, the mausoleums, the makeshift human camps, and this atmosphere of, you guys lost, now figure it out in the shadows. And what I like about V Rising's lore is how it scales the Gothic fantasy by region. You leave a hostile bush and enter areas where humanity seems to be at its peak, like Silverlight Hills with Brighthaven and the power of the church. So your feeling of being a predator also turns into the feeling of invading an organized world that has structure and faith pointed against you. To me, this gives it a more mythical vampire legend aura. The world feels like a dark tale with pieces that are too big: cities, churches, ancient ruins, and this atmosphere of, you guys lost, now figure it out in the shadows. And what I like about Vampire's Bloodlord Rising is that Sangavia seems to want to be less distant myth and more dirty medieval chronicle. A cursed place where you wake up weakened, rebuild the castle, and literally feed the castle core with blood to open regions and reveal hidden areas in the mist. This, to me, changes the vibe. Instead of just exploring a map, you feel like you are reconquering territory and pulling the world closer to your dominion, as if the night were advancing along with you. And that's where Bloodlord Rising's specific flavor comes in. The Inquisition isn't just a generic vampire hunter faction. It's sold as constant resistance to your growth, almost a moral and political pressure on top of the power fantasy. Add this to the more European tone the game and coverage highlight, and Sangavia becomes a stage for folklore and medieval paranoia, with stone villages, churches, and a declared religious cleansing, which fits well with this idea of the vampire as a social threat, not just a forest monster. To me, the big lore difference here, and where the comparison gets more interesting regarding evolution or copy, is V Rising seems to prefer telling the story through the ecosystem and regions: ruins, churches, cities, forest corruption. And Bloodlord tries to put you in a more choices RPG arc, with cinematic narrative, changing public perception, and different endings depending on decisions. So I end up seeing it like this. V Rising is the Gothic of map and atmosphere. Bloodlord is the Gothic of kingdom and consequence. One makes you hunt in a ready-made world. The other tries to make you write the official version of the terror in Sangavia. In both games, blood isn't a healing item, it's identity and fuel. But the sensation of survival changes completely. In V Rising, I hunt thinking about my build and route risk, while in Bloodlord Rising, I hunt thinking about hunger, dominion, and what the game is forcing me to sustain in the long run. In V Rising, the blood types and blood quality system gives you very clear bonuses and pushes you to look for the right prey, as if they were living loot. In V Rising, this hunt becomes almost a cruel sport because the world punishes you with a very strict day-night cycle. If you stay in contact with sunlight too long, you start taking damage and only stop when entering the shadows, a covered place, or dying. This creates that tension I love and hate at the same time. You go out starving for good blood, but you're always calculating, where is the shade? Can I cross this open field? Should I risk it now or wait for night? And the most interesting thing is that blood in V Rising isn't just filling a bar, it literally defines your performance. And the higher the quality, the stronger the benefits become. So I, personally, start playing like a selective predator. It's not just any villager. I want the right type, at the right quality, because that changes my efficiency in combat and even survival when the sun is punishing. In Vampire's Bloodlord Rising, my read is that survival wants to put you in a role more like Vampire Lord than map survivor. You wake up weak, need to feed, and the game ties you heavily to the idea of rebuilding and feeding your castle of power with blood to advance and expand the world around you. This gives a vibe less like, I'm going to farm the perfect blood, and more, I have a hunger and a structure to maintain, as if blood were the currency of your ascension and your rituals of control. So when I compare the two, I get the impression that V Rising transforms blood into optimization plus tactical survival because of the sun. Hunt well, at the right time, on the right path. Bloodlord Rising, from what is presented, tries to transform blood into ritualized survival. Hunger as the engine of fantasy, and blood as the centerpiece of your growth. Closer to a vampire kingdom than a pure night raid. In V Rising, building a castle has always had that well-organized vampire Lego vibe for me. Everything is born from the castle heart, you expand on a grid with connected foundations, and when you close it off with walls, doors, and windows, the game automatically generates the roof and makes the whole thing look like a real fortress. The coolest part is that even though it's very systemic, you can do a customization I call voxel-like in feeling. You fit pieces and floors like blocks, testing layouts, optimizing flow, and giving your base an identity without needing 1,000 frills. And the castle heart isn't just the item that unlocks building, it dictates the rhythm of your castle and how much you can grow. Because besides being the central point for claiming territory, it runs on a constant supply of blood essence. I like this light pressure. If you let the blood run out, the game basically reminds you that a vampire castle isn't a condominium, it's an organism. It needs to be fed so it doesn't fall apart. In Vampire's Bloodlord Rising, the fantasy it sells for construction is a different take, more cinematic and showcase gothic, with an explicit promise of highly detailed multi-level castles, full of pieces, walls, roofs, floors, stairs, decoration, furniture, and that intention of making something that looks like Dracula's house. I feel that here, the building wants to push you toward, wow, look at my castle, with a verticality and presence, like a movie set where every floor exists to impress. And that's where the difference comes in, that for me, changes the flavor of gameplay. In Bloodlord, the idea of the castle poor as the heart of the empire is very direct and thematic because it pulses with ancient hunger, and you need to feed the core with blood to unlock regions and regain power. This tying of progression with blood makes the construction less survival base and more seat of your dominion, almost as if every tower you raise is a declaration of territory. In the end, when I put them side by side, I see V-Rising as the cleaner and more efficient one for those who enjoy base design in the details of the flow, a castle that works, and Bloodlord seems to aim for the castle as a multi-level spectacle, a castle that imposes presence. And both use a blood-fueled heart as a symbol and mechanic, just with a different focus. If I'm in a more engineer mindset, I go with V-Rising, and I'm happy with the grid and perfect fit. If I'm in a more art director mindset, the idea of erecting a vertical Gothic cathedral in Bloodlord wins me over easily. If there's a place where the comparison gets more in your face, it's combat. V-Rising is that fast ARPG with a high camera where you live by positioning, pattern reading, and landing skill shots at the right timing, while alternating between weapons and spells to build your rhythm. I always feel like it pulls you into almost arena-like combat, because every dash, every retreat, and every projectile counts a lot when the screen turns into controlled chaos. What I like about V-Rising is how weapons truly define your kit. Each type comes with its own abilities, and that changes the way you initiate, burst, and exit the target, without feeling like just a damage skin swap. It's the type of game that makes me think, okay, I messed up because I aimed poorly or got greedy, since a lot depends on hitting the strike line, the cone, the range, and the right moment to cancel or recover. Vampires Bloodlord Rising sells a very different fantasy. Skill-based combat in third person, closer to you are in the monster's body, with the camera glued to you and the weight of animations appearing more. And in my feeling, this changes everything. Instead of playing as a strategist looking at the board, I play as the predator who needs to fit the approach, dodge, and punishment into the right range. Another thing that gives personality to Bloodlord is the emphasis on vampiric powers as combat identity, not just as generic magic. The material released from the game shows abilities and movements that reinforce this idea of aggressive mobility, lunge, leap, backflip, and even a brutal attack that looks like a finisher. This, to me, is the kind of seasoning that gives the game its own face, less cute build and more moments of dominance when you become the threat of the scene. V-Rising is the school of control and precision at a fast pace, skill shots plus weapon kits, and Bloodlord tries to win you over with impact and the fantasy of the vampire in third person, focusing on brutality and powers. If I want cleaner, more legible, and competitively mobile combat, I go back to V-Rising. If I want to feel the weight of the vampire hunting, I totally understand the appeal of Bloodlord. In V-Rising, the progression that hooks me the most is that feeling of hunt turns into kit. You take down a V-blood carrier, and besides advancing in the crafting chain, you unlock things that genuinely change your array of spells, passives, and even magic schools in the spellbook. I like it because the game pushes you out of your comfort zone. If you want skill variety, there's no elegant shortcut. You have to go there, track the target, and win. And this speaks directly to the way V-Rising gives you power. Many iconic forms and abilities come from specific bosses, so every victory feels like an upgrade with a face, like unlocking wolf form by defeating Alpha the White Wolf, or later gaining bat form by defeating Knight Marshal Styx. To me, this is progression that creates memory. I remember the fight not just for the loot, but because from then on, my mental map changes. Mobility, infiltration, traversal. In Vampires Bloodlord Rising, the promise is a more continuous evolution RPG approach, with a skill tree that you unlock and refine, almost as if you were sculpting a vampire style over time. The game explicitly talks about evolving abilities through an intricate skill tree and embracing forms that shape your legacy, which places progression more in the line of character build and identity, not just boss trophies. And this is where it tries to differentiate itself more strongly. Besides turning into a bat, it also pulls in the idea of alternating forms, like aristocrat and hunter, as if they were stances and identities with functions on your path. I like this concept because it gives that social versus predator vampire fantasy. One form to infiltrate and position, and another to go for brutality. And then progression stops being just a number and becomes a role in the world. So when I place them side by side, I feel V Rising as a game where progression is boss defeats and new tools, tightly tied to the loop of hunting and unlocks, spells, passives, and shapeshifts coming from V-Blood. Bloodlord, on the other hand, sounds more like I evolve and specialize via skill tree plus shapeshift, bat and social/combat forms like aristocrat hunter, with an evolution that seems more continuous and customizable in the long term. If one seems like a checklist of predators granting you powers, the other tries to be an RPG, where you polish your vampire like a signature. In V Rising, I see the management of thralls more as a practical extension of your castle. You grab humans, convert them, and put them to work, and this becomes a gear of efficiency that feeds your progress. What stands out to me is this feeling that your servants are, above all, function, optimizing routine, gaining resources with less friction, and leaving you free to do what the game really wants, which is hunting V-Blood and evolving your kit. At the same time, V Rising has a somewhat cold charm to this, because the relationship is very evil corporation. The human becomes a piece, and the fun is in the control and logistics. I feel the game gets it right when it makes this easy to understand and satisfying to adjust, like tidying up the house so it works for you, without turning thralls into a soap opera. For an ARPG with an accelerated loop, it fits perfectly. In Vampire's Bloodlord Rising, the idea seems to go toward a more dramatic and vampire family side. You don't just convert humans for tasks, the game tries to go a step further with loyal vampires, with characteristics and weaknesses and a real sense of a clan. In my head, this changes the fantasy. It stops being just workforce management and becomes a shadowy court where every ally has a mechanical personality and, potentially, cost and risk. And that's where the point that interests me most in this comparison comes in. When the game deepens loyalty and weaknesses, I start to care more about who I transform and why. It's not just which one gives more resources, but which combination strengthens my clan without becoming a ticking time bomb. This type of system, when it works, creates emergent history, because your clan isn't just decoration, it becomes strategy and consequence. In the end, for me, both start from the same basic fantasy of a vampire boss turning people into servants, but they diverge in the seasoning. V Rising is more direct, cleaner, and focused on efficiency and rapid progression. Bloodlord seems to want you to feel like you are building a lineage, with alliances, flaws, and that feeling that your castle isn't just a base, it's a nest of dangerous relationships. In V Rising, multiplayer for me is practically the natural mode of the game, because the server structure creates a constant sensation of a living world, with disputed territory, unpredictable encounters, and that tension of always being watched by another stronger or smarter player. When I enter a full server, I feel that every trip to farm, every boss, and every return to the castle has weight, because it's not just PvE, it's forced coexistence with people who can turn into rivals at any moment. And that's where V Rising's PvP shines, at least when you are in the right mood. It is intense, fast, and usually transforms a simple resource route into a story. Like, I was just going to get materials and came back with a 20-minute brawl. I like it because the game forces you to improve movement reading and decision-making, and at the same time gives you that adrenaline that solo PvE rarely delivers. But it's a type of fun that requires a strong stomach, because there's also frustration, especially when you lose time or progress because of a confrontation you didn't choose. Now, on the side of Vampire's Bloodlord Rising, the proposal of co-op for up to 4 players without bringing PvP into the conversation totally changes the contract with the player. For me, this is a very conscious choice. Instead of social tension, the focus turns to partnership, synergy, and that feeling of a shared campaign where you and your friends build, evolve, and resolve things together. It's more, let's make our empire, and less, let's survive the server. What I find most interesting in this approach is how it changes the emotional rhythm of the game. Pure co-op tends to be more comfortable for creating a routine, testing builds, exploring, and enjoying progression systems without mentally preparing yourself for a human ambush. And for content, this is also a full plate. It can yield group stories, funny moments, combined strategies, and that coordinated chaos of 4 vampires deciding everything by shouting. So if I have to summarize the difference the way I really feel playing, V-Rising is multiplayer as a social arena, with the server and conflict as fuel for drama, and this can be addictive when it clicks. Bloodlord seems to bet on co-op as a clean fantasy, the type of experience you schedule with the crew, play for hours, and leave satisfied. In V-Rising, I always go back to that feeling of polished isometric that makes everything more legible and competitive, because the high camera transforms chaos into information. This perspective helps a lot when reading hitboxes, seeing projectiles, and making quick decisions. And this matches the proposal of agile combat and organized base building. I feel it's a game that prefers clarity over spectacle, and that's why it usually feels more rounded in the visual package. Bloodlord, being third person, moves me in a different way. It's more immersive, more you are there, and this naturally gives greater weight to animations, lighting, and the gothic atmosphere in general. The camera behind the character makes the vampire fantasy more physical, more cinematic. And when it works, you feel like you are strolling inside the world, not just controlling a piece on it. But this choice also comes with a price, and that's where performance comes in, because I tend to be very picky about this. Games in early access almost always come with rough edges, and in third person, it's generally easier to notice when the frame rate fluctuates, when the draw distance burdens the system, or when stability isn't at the ideal level. Furthermore, more immersive games with a focus on fidelity usually demand more from the machine, so the idea of higher requirements in Bloodlord doesn't surprise me. The point is that for many people, this defines if the experience is wow or oh my god. In V-Rising, on the other hand, the choice of isometric gives a sense of technical efficiency. Less camera fighting with scenery, less visual stress in reading, and normally a more predictable path for optimization. I'm not saying it's light, but the style helps maintain consistency, and consistency for me is gold when I want to record gameplay and not be held hostage by stutters in important moments. It's the type of game that seems made to run well and look beautiful at the same time. V-Rising is functional beauty with a perspective that prioritizes control and clarity, and Bloodlord is ambitious beauty with a camera that prioritizes presence and immersion. But because it is an early access and aims higher, it might demand more from the PC and oscillate more. To me, Bloodlord doesn't seem like a copy in the lazy sense, but it's also not that evolution that humiliates V-Rising. It takes the same base fantasy of a vampire building dominion and tries to push it into a more narrative and character RPG format. If V-Rising is the game I open when I want sharp systems and an addictive loop, Bloodlord is the one I test when I want atmosphere, story, and the feeling of living the role of the big vampire in the world. Where I really buy the idea of evolution in Bloodlord is in the declared ambitions. It hits the key of a campaign with a gothic story and clan management, with loyal servants who execute orders and help build and expand the castle. And it ties this into a more RPG progression, with a skill tree and forms like aristocrat and hunter, besides turning into a bat, which gives a flavor of identity quite different from what I feel in V Rising. But at the same time, it's impossible to ignore that it is walking on a street that V Rising paved, building a castle, dominating territory, transforming people into servants, hunting to grow. All of this speaks directly to the same imagery. Bloodlord's own marketing summarizes the package as exploring a dark open world, building your castle, growing followers, and playing solo or in co-op, which is exactly the kind of checklist that makes the comparison happen automatically. Pros and cons, in my view. Bloodlord wins when I want a more immersive and campaign experience, with management and narrative as pillars, and it still has the bonus of co-op for up to 4 players as a central part of the proposal. The con is that it is an early access, and this, for me, always means a risk regarding polish, incomplete content, and systems that are still going to change a lot, including public plans to expand quests, story, cinematics, and management in the final version. My recommendation is very simple. If you want a game more consolidated in server identity, PvP, and a progression loop based on hunting V-Blood bosses in a sharp isometric ARPG, V Rising is still the safest choice. If you want a more cinematic vampire fantasy with a focus on story and clan management, and are willing to get in early to see the game grow, Bloodlord looks like an evolution of a proposal, not a copy of mechanics.